Essentially, what I'm going to kind of dive into today is part art talk, part law lecture, part amateur physics lecture. And because all of these aspects, whether it be physics or policy or economics, all kind of come into this topic that I did my art show on. And so I want to start by saying, Anne said this already, but if there are questions that pop up as I'm speaking, please feel free to ask, because I really like I give talks on more the Native Nations aspect of electromagnetic spectrum kind of in the policy space. And I always like for it to be conversational, because in those conversations, it's more me as an attorney who is Navajo and who studied federal Indian law, kind of bringing more of the tribal law aspect to policy people in DC or otherwise who work on spectrum. And so this is kind of fun because it just gets to be a little bit more open, where we kind of get to touch on all these different aspects. And what I really tried to do with this show is bring this story into multiple different, kind of tell it multiple different ways. And maybe that's how I'll start, is sort of going around the room, and it's explained a few different ways so that you can kind of just grasp onto an idea and follow that. Because all of these things that I'm talking about in this show are, it's non-tangible and it's invisible. And so it's really kind of hard to wrap your head around, because it's not something you can touch or see. It's sort of just, I always joke that if I was doing this work in the 1800s, they would have burned me as a witch, because it's kind of like you can't see it. I'm like, there's like invisible waves in the sky and they're worth money. No, you don't understand. So, so I'm glad to be doing it now. So the show is designed sort of clockwise, which is, I think, just kind of naturally as a Navajo mind, like when you walk into a hogan, you always go clockwise around the fire. And so that when I came into this space, that's how I wanted to design my show. So I'll go clockwise around, and hopefully it'll be a neck stretch and not a crane in your neck a bit. But it starts with the land over in the back right corner. I hiked the Colorado Trail as soon as I was done with law school, because I spent 3 years just being in a building, and being out in DC or being in Tucson is where I went to law school. When I got done with that, I was so tired of being inside talking about land and talking about rights and talking about minerals. I wanted to get out and see it. And that's exactly what I did. It was in 2020 is when I graduated. And so, as the world was shut down, I just went into the woods, and I hiked from Denver to Durango, which is about 500 miles. And as I was out there, as I think you do as a Native person, but especially as a Native attorney, I noticed the erasure on a lot of trail signs. If you're an avid hiker, you realize that a lot of times trail signs, the story of that place starts with the pioneers and with the industry. It's like in the 1800s, they started mining timber out here or whatever it is, or even being out, at 10,000 feet and seeing these wide open mines in Colorado was really drove home like everything that I had just learned through law school. So we start with the land because the way that what this show is about, which is radio waves, electromagnetic spectrum, the way that it's valued is in a geographic base, which, jumping over here for a second, is what this piece is about. This piece, if you can imagine a radio tower in the middle of it, when you get closer, you can see a trace of a map of Oklahoma without the panhandle. That is sort of like a spectrum footprint, if you will, because if you can imagine a tower in the middle of each circle, that's how you can blast signal out around that tower. And this, I did this with earth pigment acrylic that I made, gathered from around Navajo Nation and New Mexico. Those earth pigments, because coming back, the land, the spectrum is only as good as the power that you put into the tower and the people that are using it on the land. And so, it really starts with the land, ends with the land, and I always kind of think of it as like one of the most valuable resources that we have in the modern era, and it's totally separate from the water conversation. That's like something that I never touched in law school and barely touched at the Navajo Nation, because that issue is just like, it seems it's very similar in the fact that spectrum is a natural resource and water is a natural resource, but spectrum is about being able to have a business and put it online, and it's about being able to call help if you have an emergency, a crisis. It's about being able to go to school when you're out in a rural area. You can attend classes online. It's connecting us to things that are really, really important. Whereas water is like, you either live or you die with water. And so, so I'm gonna stay in this realm and leave water to the experts. But anyway, so we're talking about land and we're talking about frequencies that go through the air in this particular show. So going to the next one, it's sort of taking that land, I forgot to say, so I left that message on a lot of trail signs. I had some duct tape that was really good for blisters or for putting a note on trail signs. And I would say, just as a reminder for people that pass through there, you're on Ute homelands, and I would put that up on the trail sign. So then bringing that into radio spectrum, that's what the next one is. So what that colorful one with the red letters on it is it's a government chart of how we use all of our radio frequencies. So the government puts this out. The last one I think was updated in 2016 is that chart, and those blocks show how we use different frequencies. So one frequency might be set aside for use for maritime mobile, for ships to communicate with each other. Another one might be for satellites, for that like Elon Musk that SpaceX would want to buy and use. Another one might be for TV broadcasting, for them to send TV signals through the air. Another one might be for radio. And so essentially what happens every 10 years is that these licenses are sold by the Federal Communications Commission. They go up for auction. AT&T, Verizon, all these big companies bid on them. And then the FCC sells them the license. So a license is essentially, it's just like sort of like buying land, but it's for 10 years. And so they have this license to use that particular frequency for whatever they want within certain power limits and whatnot. And they give that money to the FCC, which goes into Treasury. The United States has made $284 billion off of spectrum licenses since the 90s when they started doing auctions. So they're, every 10 years, these licenses come up for auction and they do it again. So it's infinitely economically viable for the US to keep doing this. So my argument from a native policies perspective is on tribal lands, tribes should have access to every single one of those frequencies that you see on that chart because it's a natural resource. And as our treaty rights say, whatever wasn't given away, we keep it. But that's not what's happening right now. Right now, it's just indiscriminately sold by the US. And tribes, one, don't even get to use the frequencies other than a limited few that we'll talk about. And two, that money goes to US Treasury. None of that money comes back to the tribe. So it's really kind of double disenfranchisement of rights for Indigenous people. And then, we see that manifest in the digital divide on tribal lands. That if you've ever driven through the Navajo Nation or driven on a lot of tribal lands, we don't have a lot of connection. Your cell service goes out. There's not a place you can pull over and use Wi-Fi easily. And that's partially because of spectrum. It's also because of access to capital and the bureaucracy of putting fiber in the ground. But spectrum is one piece of that puzzle. So I'm going to kind of pause there because it's a lot of information. Does anybody have any questions at this point? If not, I'll keep going. Yes, sir.
Did the state of New Mexico try and get more wireless out to the Navajo Nation?
It's really at the federal level. So even states don't have a lot of control over their spectrum. It's really happening with the FCC is the one who's sort of taken all the authority over spectrum. Yeah, so there's a lot of advocacy. I just finished I just quit my job, but I was working for the Navajo Nation for the president. And that was a lot of what I was doing was sending these letters and there's certain windows, if you know anything about the federal systems, there's these notice of proposed rulemaking and then you get to send letters. And so that was one thing I was always on top of in that role was sending a letter from the president to the chairman of the FCC, Chairman Carr, and essentially saying like, hey, don't forget about us. We have rights and we'd like to have the spectrum back. So that's really consistently what's going to happen for the next, forever to try to get them those rights.
Any headway being made?
So a little bit. So in 2020 was really the first significant recognition of one tiny little sliver of what's called the 2.5 gigahertz. Which is actually, we were listening on Bluetooth to music, before we started. So Bluetooth travels over 2.4 gigahertz. So if you go about 100 hertz higher than that, or 1,000 math, then you've got the 2.5 gigahertz, and that's what this is depicting here. So this is pulled directly from a tiny little sliver, 3 columns of however many columns are over there. After the talk, you can look a little bit closer, but 2.5 gigahertz is the one frequency that tribes do have rights over that the FCC has recognized. Again, my policy argument is that every color on that map should belong to tribes on tribal land, but this was one tiny step, which, it's a crack. It's, something we can hopefully get our foot in the door and say, you've recognized this before. You recognize that this is valuable. This is valuable to tribes as well. In DC, I think a lot of my work, unfortunately, is just advocating by educating. Out here, I think when you live in a place like Santa Fe, inherently, you go out to feast days, the Navajo Nation is around, you have friends or people in your life who are Native. In DC, somebody literally asked me what Indians are going to do with the internet. Like, they don't. The most that they know, some of those people know about us is John Wayne movies. That's kind of where we're starting. So going from that knowledge level to, and we want the frequency, those are the kind of people that would burn me as a witch a couple hundred years ago. So that's who we're up against. So there are moments, the advocacy we've been doing in the past years for another frequency called the upper C band, which is really good for broadband connection as well. So I think it'll be that for, and we'll see when administrations change. Obviously right now, it's not exactly, knowledge of tribal issues is not flowing out of the White House right now. So there's a lot of education that needs to happen still. So, yes?
How do other countries manage their spectrums, and how do they also collaborate or partner or raise their indigenous peoples?
Yeah. Similarly, to your first question of how other countries, I would say most countries have some sort of chart like this, and the chart's interesting because it essentially is a story about the country's values, who has power. Like any big chunks of color that you see on that chart, pretty much means that those industries have good lobbyists because they're the ones who can get contiguous. It's most valuable when it's in a chunk so that you can kind of have that whole area, as opposed to something like Bluetooth. I don't know if you heard, Bluetooth is not super reliable. Like you could hear it kind of skip, and that's because this machine is constantly changing the frequency it's on. It'll change it hundreds of times in a second because it's unlicensed, and so it's just kind of always switching to whatever's available. Versus, industry want beachfront spectrum. They want a big chunk of it so that their machines don't have to switch. So the connection stays consistent. I don't know if that makes sense. But other countries, as far as indigenous rights, I would say the most interesting one is New Zealand. Where the Maori, the indigenous people of New Zealand, they argued that spectrum is tonga, which to them means things treasured. So like their language would be considered tonga. This is from their treaty. Their children are considered tonga. Their minerals and their natural resources and their land, it all kind of falls under this one word that is like something that we really treasure, something that's really valuable. And they argued in court that spectrum is tonga. And a court found for the Maori people, but that court's decisions, because it's a treaty court, were not binding on the Crown, the government. So they've been in negotiations, and that's been happening for about 5 years now. And they have a good chunk of their spectrum. I think they have about 20% of commercial spectrum moving forward. So this is happening, this conversation is happening in a lot of different countries with Indigenous people. Mexico has recognized Indigenous spectrum rights in communities to help address their digital divides in Indigenous communities. And so, yeah, it's really, really fascinating to watch it happen. Canada just opened a tribal spectrum window for Indigenous people or Indigenous groups up there. And so, yeah, it's cool to kind of watch the dominoes fall in different countries around the world. So, and there's also, spectrum doesn't end. It's like water in that it doesn't respect boundaries of nations, and it's infinite. It goes out forever. It comes from the sun. It comes from Earth. It's kind of going everywhere. And so, so it's interesting, like when you're talking about like the Tohono down in like Tucson near the border. Their issues are very different because right down there they have so much border patrol that's utilizing so much of their spectrum they're blasting out radio signals that can tell you if a rabbit moves from 5 miles away so that they can track if anybody is out there. And so that's kind of a different issue that the Tohono O'odham have to deal with when they're trying to get access to their spectrum, or how is this being used around us? And how does it affect wildlife? How does it affect bats that are trying to hunt? And, these are things that we don't necessarily know because the people that are utilizing it to catch, whoever's in the desert, they aren't thinking about the bats. They're thinking about, the tools that they're utilizing and blasting. So, yeah, so there's all kinds of interesting tangents we can go down. I'll continue with this piece right above Anne here. This is my version of an actual 1910 Department of Interior flyer that the original one, maybe you've seen it, it said Indian land for sale. So this was sort of like as westward expansion was continuing to roll out in America, they were kind of saying the message that the government was putting out was, we've tamed the Indians, don't worry about them anymore. You can come out here and there's land available and you can come buy this land. And now we're 116 years beyond that, but now the resource that we're talking about is spectrum. So it's sort of this, a comment on, this is similar policies that the federal government used for land and Indigenous people, but now we're talking about spectrum. It's also a very valuable natural resource. We don't get a say in whether it's sold out from under us or whether we get to use it, but the government's kind of opening it up to make money off of. And so it's sort of same policy, different century, different resource. And that's that one. Coming into these are, as you can probably tell, pieces of the spectrum chart. And this one I put Old J, which is the moon. And so it's just kind of a nod, this one and the one in the back, which has Johana, which is the sun bearer. These kind of go together in a way because, as I said, spectrum comes from sun. The UV rays that warm your skin and the infrared light that comes from the sun, or that burn your skin rather, and the heat and the light, these are all different types of spectrum. They're different wavelengths of spectrum. And so that, as we think about it, the Navajo, we really look to the moon and the sun as these important deities and these important beings in the way that we see the world. And when you look back to art that Indigenous people have done, forever, but especially like these, I looked a lot to like Hasode or Harrison Begay or Gerald Naylor, who's my favorite Navajo painter. And when you look all the way back to the 50s, you can see them making art with these deities, with Navajo cosmology, with rainbows, which is also spectrum, and the sun and the moon, and these really important beings in the way that we understand the world and where we came from, and these people that help us and who's important. These are kind of my nod to some of the Indian school painters who have been making this art with these deities in them for decades and decades. This one, for anyone who's seen the show Pluribus, we really enjoyed that show, and the frequency that makes everyone go crazy in that show is from that chart, and it's this one. And then I added, this is a little petroglyph from near the San Juan River in Bluff, Utah, that I always thought looked like a dude with a Wi-Fi symbol over him, so I put that on there because I thought it was cool. These are sweetgrass that have DSL copper internet cable running through them. So this is about connecting with each other and the way that we communicate from one another on Earth, and then the way that we send prayers upward and communicate with deities above us. We just talked about the land one. We talked about this one. This is the 2.5 gigahertz, which this is actually a study for a mural, which I think is still up. It's at CCA, the Center for Contemporary Arts, over on, I think, Old Pecos Trail. And that is a massive mural that I did last year. And those are the study for them. So that's how I was doing all of the measuring and calculating of, how to get these figures on the wall. And I think there's 18 of them on that mural. I did one for each tribe that was actually able to access the 2.5 gigahertz through the federal government's licensing window in 2020. So each tribe that has that frequency, has the right to it on their land, is represented on that mural with one of these patterns. And then the watercolors in the back are, again, earth pigments. They're watercolors that I created with earth pigments with soil that I gathered around the Navajo Nation and around New Mexico. And those are also, that was me wrapping my mind around the idea that maybe we would do it different. If and when tribes have the rights to all of the frequencies or more of the frequencies on our land, as I said, the way that it's organized as far as the licenses and the rights go are reflective of how a government values what they're using it for. And so it's sort of like, well, maybe if we had all of our frequencies, maybe we wouldn't use them all. Maybe they wouldn't be used in sacred places. Maybe they wouldn't be used during certain times, like during an eclipse. That's a really sacred time for Navajo people, and maybe frequencies go quiet then, and it's just more about emergency services during that time. And so each one of those is sort of just me contemplating, like, how could we do it different? Maybe they would look the same because, we are also a government that has economics and wants to bring in money, and those are valuable resources. So yeah, so those are earth pigments as well. And then the last one, I don't know if everyone can see it. This one I did during law school. And this is a devil's claw. If you've never seen a devil's claw, they're very strange kind of wood-like substances that look just like that, and they're plants, and they carry the seeds. And I went to a place called Oak Flat, which has been in the news a lot. It's in Arizona because the indigenous people, the San Carlos Apache, are trying to prevent a copper mine from taking all of the copper out of that place, because it's a very important place to them for their women's ceremonies. They do what we call a kinalda, which is a woman's coming of age ceremony. And that's where the women go in the San Carlos Apache tribe to go do their women's ceremonies. And when you walk there, these will just hook around your feet, because that's what they do, to catch a ride to the next place with the seeds in it. They'll hook to animals or humans or whatever. And, they look like uteruses. And I include this in the show just as sort of a reminder, because that copper, it's here. It's in our phones. It's in our electric vehicles. It's in our every piece of technology that you ever buy. It has copper in it because it's a great conductor. And people, again, to the why do Indians need the internet sort of mentality? People will say, like, well, why don't they just do their ceremony somewhere else? As if the copper being in the ground is not something that makes that place important and makes that place sacred. You know, as if the indigenous people, the San Carlos Apache, didn't know that that place has the greatest semiconductor veins in that you can possibly get running through it, and that's why it's an important place to them. So I just include it to kind of, as a reminder to us all that, like, yes, we all want technology. Yes, we all want electric vehicles and cell phones and the new iPhone and whatever, but it also comes at a cost to the land. You know, it's something that is, all of these minerals and all of these parts of our phones and whatnot are, you know, they're being pulled out of the land. They're being pulled out of the ground. And so, you know, we also have a responsibility to be responsible in the way that we're utilizing these technologies and appreciating them and recycling them and using them. So that's pretty much every bit of the show. I'm happy to take questions. Yes. Hi.
I'm also a lawyer turned quiz.
Cool.
I appreciate it very much. This reminded me that towards the end of my legal career, I actually had a Fulbright in Australia, and I won't get into it, but the issues that I was there for, people were telling me about cellular frequency issues among the indigenous, and there was an effort underway, and it's not an area I know well, but to imply, rather than do this statutorily, to extend from a basic land rights premise and sort of imply these types of things through land rights, and totally forgot about that.
Yeah.
Is that something that you've worked with, or because here, of course, federally, and I used to permit cell towers, and I know that in all the preemption issues, but just the fundamental land rights basis for that is intriguing.
Yeah.
Have you done any work with that?
Yeah, sort of. I mean, it gets tricky. My legal argument is very much based on treaty rights and sovereignty. I think the conversation gets tricky when it starts becoming about personal land rights, because that really would be such a nightmare for the federal government, as far as like, okay, the signal, you have it for here, but it has to stop here, and whatever. And so, but it would be great for people who, like mineral rights, would be able to choose. So it just sort of depends.
I think you've just converted it to American parlance, because I wasn't talking about personal land rights.
Oh, I see.
The various, communities' land rights.
Yeah.
Implied on a large basis. I mean, that's pretty esoteric, but
yeah,
it's just kind of fascinating to think about, and I'm sure this is, comes better than the rest of us, but inherent land rights of an indigenous nation, and how you might be able to imply these modern phenomena into a more ancient way of thinking. I think the argument that I've heard against, when I even kind of bring up that this is treaty-based, is essentially like when they signed the treaties, they didn't know it was there. And it's like, nobody did, first of all. And two, also kind of, yes, we did, and that's why, bringing Zhongshan and Olje, like, these rainbows and these deities that are very much a part of our understanding of the world, we have known about and looked to for forever. And so, like, maybe we didn't have the technology, we hadn't harnessed the technology yet, but at the same time, it's something like that we have very much observed and appreciated and shown gratitude to forever. So, in what way do we have to know? Like, how much knowledge is enough knowledge as far as, having rights to them, for sure. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I guess that, like many issues that impact the indigenous peoples of this country, this issue stays sort of under the radar, if you'll pardon the public. So, having said that, I'm curious as to what drew you into this issue, be able to make such knowledgeable, compelling arguments about the rights of indigenous peoples?
Yeah, when I was in my first summer of law school, I applied to what's called the Udall Congressional Internship. I'm sure everyone has heard of the Udalls in this room. So the Udalls have this fellowship that they send students to DC every year. So I worked that summer for the Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs, who's one of the highest Native appointees in the Department of Interior. So I worked for them, and it was under the first Trump administration. And as far as I could tell, the strategy of the Trump administration for tribal issues was just like make it a skeleton crew for all Indian education, Indian affairs, whatever. And so we didn't have a lot of staff. And so as an unpaid intern, they were like, we have to solve the digital divide, go figure it out. And so I was going to the White House, and I was going to the Hill, and I was going to Interior, and all these industry meetings about, why don't we have connections on tribal lands? Why are they some of the most underconnected areas in the entire nation? And that's when I learned about, I put together this report, and it was about, not having access to capital to actually put fiber in the ground or build towers. All the, like I said, the red tape and the bureaucracy to actually put fiber in the ground or build towers on tribal lands, which there's more hoops that you have to jump through to disturb the land by design, because you have to go through tribal processes and you have to go through federal processes, and it just, I think a lot of internet providers if you watch the fiber maps, they go around tribal lands for that reason. And then Spectrum was part of it. And as I kept hearing Spectrum, I had no understanding of what that was or what that meant. But as I looked into it more, my legal brain was going off of like, this is a natural resource. Like, if it's a natural resource, why do tribes not have rights to it? And it really started that simply. And then as I started understanding more about how we have viewed Spectrum as Indigenous people since time immemorial and how we've understood it, then I was like, yeah, this might take my entire lifetime, but something's got to give. So yeah, that's how I came to it. Yes, sir.
I think we're all aware that the internet is a mixed blessing.
Yeah.
Is there a certain amount of resistance on the reservation to actually expanding internet?
Yeah, absolutely. But I would say there's resistance also to expanding water. Like some people really just don't want their areas disturbed. And that was one of the things that when I worked for the nation last year, that was really shocking. Like, somebody comes around to do a survey and they might get some bullets, flying over their heads, because there's some really old school families out there who are like, everything is perfect the way that it is, don't touch anything around me. And so I would say just in general, there's resistance to utilities out there, whether it be just traditionalism, or whether it be distrust of the government, or whether it be, just kind of that traditional idea of like, we're fine the way that we are, we don't want that. And also, like you said, like wanting to protect their children and wanting to protect their grandchildren, and kind of doing that by sort of keeping the world out in that way, which, yeah, I mean, as we've seen, I don't know if you guys have followed the news about like the Meta trials here, that's been, I get it, rightly so. I'm not a mom, but I can't imagine how difficult those decisions must be. I watch my friends go through it, making those decisions about, screen time for their kids and getting the how do you get the benefits when does it start going down? And that's a really, really difficult thing. So yeah, there's definitely some of that. Yeah. Karen?
I have 3 questions.
Yes, ma'am.
Did you grow up speaking Navajo?
No.
I was just kind of curious about that. And where do the colors come from?
Yeah, so if you probably have the best view of it, you and Lori. So if you look at the left, all those different little, almost like swatches of colors, that's the key of what each color on the map means. So by the color, it says, maritime mobile, satellite, broadcasting. And then when you look to that color on the map, that's what that's what that frequency has been designated for.
And what designates the color? Like, is it something?
The policy.
Okay.
Yeah.
So nobody imagined what that frequency would look like and made a color? That's my question.
No, not necessarily. I don't know who made that map. I think they made it in the 90s, but I'm really interested to see the mind that kind of created that and chose those colors.
Yeah, that's what I'm.
Yeah. Because you don't see a lot of government documents that feel creative and imaginative. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, which again is, everybody that I've met in the law world and policy world who works on spectrum, they're such cool people because they really have to grasp these things that are really challenging and then operate at a very high level as far as, understanding. So it's essentially just a key of how you're using each frequency. So at the very top where it's like the white box, those are really, really big waves. And then on the right corner, the bottom right corner, those are really, really small waves. So I know not everyone can see this really well, but I did like big waves here and then it gets really, really small. So if you can imagine, the bigger waves are those are waves that are AM and FM radio. And so those can be, meters long as far as the wavelength goes. And then you get into more Wi-Fi and cellular, and those are smaller waves. Then you get into microwave, literally what heats your food. And those are much smaller. Then we're talking about body heat. Our body heat we have our own frequencies. We as humans have spectrum coming off of us as well. Remote controls, when you change the channel or when you open your garage door, that's any wireless connection that you're using in your life, that's using spectrum, that's using frequencies. So remote controls are here. And then we're talking about visible light and the rays that burn your skin when you're out in the sun too long. And we're getting to very, very, very small, atomic level waves now. And then we're, X-rays and nuclear power are next. So this is we call it spectrum because there's a whole spectrum of different sized waves that are good for different things, that are useful for different things. So when we're talking about that map, we're talking about here. There's only a small window of the frequencies that exist that can actually be used for telecommunications, but there's many, many more frequencies that aren't used for telecommunications, and that's why it's called a spectrum, because there's a whole infinite different waves that exist in the world.
So one more question.
Yeah.
Did you grow up doing art? Did you grow up wanting to be a lawyer? How did they connect for you?
That is a good question. I've always done art. I took art lessons when I was a kid, but I've never been formally trained in art. But I did start doing a lot more art in law school, really, I would say around this. And I think it was because it helped me, in law school, as a Native person in law school studying Indian law, you kind of it's traumatizing in a way because you are understanding for the first time ever why things are the way that they are, and it's not a pretty picture. And you understand the details of the genocide that happened to your people, understanding for us the Treaty of 1868 meant going to Bosque Redondo, going to this place where we were held in a concentration camp for 4 years. And then reading the treaty, you understand, this is what they were negotiating and the best that they could do to get us to come home. And then we got to come home to the Navajo Nation, and it's grown since then. But then you also have to understand that, not everybody did. Not everybody got to go home. All the Oklahoma tribes went through the same thing that we did, but they didn't get to go home. They're still in Oklahoma. Whereas, the Cherokee are from the Southeast. And so you understand things in a different way and it hits in a different way. And so in law school, I think the art was really, really helpful for me to process that and understand kind of, in the same way that hiking the Colorado Trail helped me, the art also helped me just kind of be like get the heaviness out, to understand it in a way that I could make sense of and then build upon, as opposed to just letting it drag me down. So yeah, and then the law, I never thought I'd go to law school. I thought I'd be a therapist. I thought I had applied. I was in China for a year, and when I was in China, I was teaching tennis, and I applied to go to school at Berkeley for their social work program. And I came back to do that, but then I got really sick, and so I didn't end up going to that program. But I had a GRE score, and a few years later, University of Arizona started accepting the GRE instead of the LSAT for law school. So I kind of just threw my score and my application into that system, and they gave me a full ride. So I was like, I guess I'm going to law school. So I did that. Yeah, so yeah, it's sort of just been going with it and just, seeing what opportunities come up and using my mind to create things that make sense to me and help them make sense to other people as well. Yes, ma'am.
Where do you see yourself in 10 years or 5 years?
Oh, gosh. 10 years is tough. I never would have said, let's see, 10 years ago, I was 24, and I don't know where I was. I think I'm looking at Brittany because she's one of my best friends for a long time. I think I was in Durango. I hadn't gone to law school. I was I was taking care of elders, running a home care company. And I'm not sure that I ever would have said law school, and I'm not sure that I ever would have said, giving a talk about my art in Santa Fe on Canyon Road. So, I hope that in 10 years it's the same, that I'm doing something that I never could have imagined, because I would say, coming from a place like Farmington, the hardest part when I look at kids who are coming out of that place, or I think about coming out of that place, the hardest part is just how far it is from opportunities. That it's getting better now, but you don't even know what you don't know as far as the opportunities that are in the world. And so I think that I'm still maybe catching up a little bit, and I'm still kind of learning about what opportunities exist in the world. I've thought about maybe doing the MFA at IAIA. I think that would be something that would be really fun and would help me build on some of these ideas and give me more tools as far as, how I can express these ideas in my brain and share them with the world in more exquisite ways. So I think about that. But yeah, I think right now I've sort of checked a lot of the boxes that, it's like go to law school, go back and work for your tribe. And I did that. And now I have that monkey off my back. And so now I think it's maybe just a time for me to think about me and what I want and what sounds fun for me. So I'm not sure, but check back in. We'll see. It's gonna be crazy. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Just on going directly on art, do you know and look a lot at Gerhard Richter? Oh, you should.
Okay.
He has color series, but he also has a whole bunch of painting series on spectrum, and strontium, that I think you would find very informative with what you're doing.
Cool, that sounds great. Most people look at my art and say Mondrian and the blockiness of it all. So, yeah.
With Sid Rector, I think you'll really just hone in on.
Cool.
Especially you should look at his strontium 90.
Sounds amazing. I'll check it out. Yeah. Yeah.
So art is such a great teaching tool for the concept that you're dealing with. As you mentioned, it's intangible, so it's really helpful in helping people understand it. I'm wondering, do you think you'll continue to build on spectrum, or are there other intangible, possible legal related things you might depict in your art?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. I have a lot of ideas around other federal Indian law adjacent topics that I will eventually like to share as well, whether it be missing and murdered Indigenous women or the Indian Child Welfare Act. Those are, Ann and I talked about including some of those in this show, and when you read the literature, it sort of alludes to it, but then I ended up just wanting to keep it spectrum focused because I didn't want to, it's confusing enough without kind of going this way and that way. But I am always sort of thinking, anytime I come across an idea or an issue, you know, Oak Flat, for example, or I have this idea for Indian Child Welfare Act about like gambling and like Price is Right sort of games that we're kind of playing with children's lives and their futures. And yeah, so I'm always sort of, every time I spend some time with an idea, you know, it kind of comes out in a different way, always artistically. And so I think the spectrum education piece is like, it's very, when I give talks about spectrum, it's so useful because when I show them a Gerald Naylor piece that has a sun symbol on it that looks like a satellite, but he made it 5 years before Sputnik was ever launched. You know, people are like, oh my gosh, I get it. Like, you guys have been thinking about these issues in space and, you know, what's up there and these deities for longer than anyone, you know? And so, yeah, I think it'll just kind of keep going whichever direction my life goes in. So I'm excited about it.
Well, yeah, you have a lot of inspiration and muses to pull from. So that's exciting.
Yeah, thanks. I think we maybe have time for one more question, if anyone has a final question. Otherwise, we can wrap it.
I have a quick.
Yes.
What is this?
Oh, thanks for asking. Okay, cool. This was part of my, it's not on right now, but this was on at my opening. So this piece, it's a rainbow box, and it has the receiving end of a baby monitor in it. For my opening, the transmitting end of the baby monitor was on the other side of the gallery in a separate room. And next to it was a book called Zhongshan, which is, as you know, the sun. And it's the story of the sun and creation in Navajo. So people could read, try to read Navajo into that end, and it would come out this end. So what a baby monitor uses is 1.9 gigahertz frequency, which again, you can go over to the map after and look at what that is. This is similar to Bluetooth. It's an unlicensed frequency. So essentially, the Navajo language flowing through this space over that frequency from one place to the other is, again, kind of along this line of like reclamation of, indigenizing these frequencies in this place. So it kind of reclaims it with the Navajo language from, through the gallery on the 1.9 gigahertz frequency. And then similarly, the Bluetooth does that as well. So it's just sort of, again, because it's intangible and invisible, this was another way of, understanding, what is happening? What are we talking about? These are things that we use every single day, whether it be a baby monitor, a remote control, your cell phone, Wi-Fi, anywhere that you're using it. It's information that's traveling from one place to another, almost like magic, but it's really just energy moving information over a frequency instantaneously, which is just the coolest thing ever. It's like so cool. So yeah, so it's just, again, another way to kind of conceptualize what we're talking about here. That's one of the ways.
Good job.
Thank you. Okay, well, I think we'll call it. Thank you all so much for coming.